going to be the sole cure to the problem of this factious problem, right? There needed to be something more. They are not found to be such on the injustice and violence of individuals and lose their efficacy in proportion to the number combined together. That is, in proportion as their efficacy becomes needful. And we saw that coming after 1808 to 1861. From this view of the subject, it may be concluded that a pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person, can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. A common passion or interest will, in almost every case, be felt by a majority of the whole. A communication and concert result from the form of government itself, and there is nothing to check the inducements to sacrifice the weaker party or an obnoxious individual. Hence it is that such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Theoretic politicians who have patronized this species of government have erroneously supposed that by reducing mankind to a perfect equality in their political rights, they would at the same time be perfectly equalized and assimilated in their possessions, their opinions, and their passions. So do you see the flaw with the progressives? Well, if we make everybody the same, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, what's that all about? It's all about trying to make everybody the same. Now, all men are created equal. It tells us that in the Declaration of Independence. But it doesn't say that all men want equally the same thing. What we are supposed to have equal are our rights and our opportunity. What you do with your opportunity is your right. But don't tell me what I have to do with my opportunity. My son-in-law's boss all the time is saying, how come your father-in-law is not a multimillionaire? He said, well, he could be. He just doesn't care about money. Never have. But could I be a multimillionaire? Absolutely. It's all about what I do with my opportunity. I get people all the time going, John, why don't you charge for that? Because I don't want to. Because that's not what makes me tick. Now, other people, do I hold it against them when they charge for that stuff? No. Because it's what they get to do with their opportunity. We're equal in our opportunity. We're not equal in what we have or what we must do or what we must be. So all men are created equal. They're created equal with those things that make them who they are, because those are possessions. Our beliefs, our character, that's all our possession. And thank God we're all so different. Wouldn't it be boring if we were all the same? I know my wife can't stand me when the power's out for only about 2 hours. So I don't know how I could stand myself if everybody was the same. A republic, by which I mean a government in which the scheme of representation takes place, opens a different prospect and promises the cure for which we are seeking. Let us examine the points in which it varies from pure democracy, and we shall comprehend both the nature of the cure and the efficacy which it must derive from the union. The two great points of difference between a democracy and a republic are, first, the delegation of the government in the latter to a small number of citizens elected by the rest. Secondly, the greater number of citizens and greater sphere of country over which the latter may be extended. The effect of the first difference is, on the one hand, to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country, and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations. Under such a regulation, it may well happen that the public voice pronounced by the representatives of the people will be more consonant to the public good than if pronounced by the people themselves. Okay, so he's telling us here that in all parties and all groups of people, there's faction. And you can either deal with the faction by dealing with its causes or dealing with its effects. And we found that dealing with its causes don't work. We have to deal with its effects. I lost my train of thought, sorry. Lost my train of thought. Passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of their country, and whose patriotism and love of justice will, sacrifice temporary to partial consideration. Under such regulation, it may happen. Public voice pronounced by the representative will be constant body pronounced. I lost my train of thought. There was an important thing I was going to bring up there.
This before.
Yeah.
Convene for the purpose of the love of justice.
That's right.
And that's what we're missing.
That's right, the love of justice. Now, what he talks about is there's going to be different factions, right? Oh, I know what he's, okay, sorry. Yes, factions. So he said there's going to be factions in these different groups, and we have to deal with it by dealing with its effects, not its causes. But here he's saying the people themselves, because remember, there's the government body that we elect, and then there's the great pool of authority, which is the people. He said not only will we have faction here, but we'll have faction in the great pool of the people, even. And so he talks about protecting the people from their own best intentions. And he gets into that. How do we do that? So when we start getting a little further in the Federalist Papers, you're going to find he does that in the way they set up the 5th article of the Constitution. Now, I know that's a big thing because everybody's talking about the Convention of States, right? Well, the reason why it's so arduous and the reason why they did that is to prevent the people from their own best intentions, because the people are subject to faction themselves. That's what I wanted to bring out. Is it on the other hand? On the other hand, the effect may be inverted. Men of factious tempers, of local prejudices, or of sinister designs may, by intrigue, by corruption, or by other means, first obtain the suffrages and then betray the interests of the people. Oh, do we have that today? Yeah. This is why we complain about all politicians lying, right? Because what they're trying to do is get the suffrages. What's suffrages? Suffrages is the vote, right? There was a great video I watched the other day. They set up a table on a college campus and they were asking people if they would sign their petition to stop women's suffrage. You cannot believe, and there was one political science major that came by there and she goes, well, I think the toxic masculinity is horrible and I think yes, I'll sign that to prevent the suffrage of women. A political science major in your university didn't understand that women's suffrage was about women's vote. So it's the suffrage. So first they will get the suffrage of the people, and then they'll go somewhere and they'll practice their evil arts. The question resulting is whether small or extensive republics are more favorable to the election of proper guardians of the public weal. And it is clearly decided in favor of the latter by two obvious considerations. In the first place, it is to be remarked that however small the republic may be, the representatives must be raised to a certain number in order to guard against the cabals of a few, and that however large it may be, they must be limited to a certain number in order to guard against the confusion of the multitude. Hence, the number of representatives in the two cases not being in proportion to that of the two constituents, and being proportionally greater in the small republic, it follows that if the proportion of fit character be not less in the large than in the small republic, the former will present a greater option and consequently a greater probability of a fit choice. So do you think they worried about stolen elections then? Do you think they worried about cheating then? Absolutely. It's clear in what he's saying. Do you think they worried about lying politicians then? Absolutely. It's pretty clear what he's saying. So, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. In the next place, as each representative will be chosen by a greater number of citizens in the large than in the small republic, it will be more difficult for unworthy candidates to practice with success the vicious arts by which elections are too often carried. And the suffrages of the people, being more free, will be more likely to center in men who possess the most attractive merit and the most diffusive and established characters. It must be confessed that in this, as in most other cases, there is a mean on both sides of which inconveniences will be found to lie. Again, there's no perfect system. So there will be inconveniences on both sides. But now he's going to go in and explain what they've looked at because of the natural nature of man and what they've come up to counteract it. By enlarging too much the number of electors, you render the representatives too little acquainted with all their local circumstances and lesser interests. So does he intend here that whoever's representing you should know the society, should know who he's representing, should know the character of those that he's representing, should know probably the local customs, should know the local processes, should be a bird of a feather? Yeah, this is why carpetbagging is so bad. People moving into an area to run for an office, because when they do that, they don't know the local character. They don't know the local flavor. So how can they represent those people if they don't know that? The federal Constitution forms a happy combination in this respect, the great and aggregate interests being referred to the national, the local, and the particular to the state legislatures. The other point of difference is the greater number of citizens and extent of territory which may be brought within the compass of Republican than of Democratic government. And it is this circumstance principally which renders factious combinations less to be dreaded in the former than in the latter. The smaller the society, the fewer probably will be the distinct parties and interests composing it. The fewer the distinct parties and interests, the more frequently will a majority be found of the same party. And the smaller the number of the individuals composing a majority, and the smaller the compass within which they are placed, the more easily will the concert and execute their plans of oppression. Extend the sphere. Now we're going to talk about the spheres in 39. Extend the sphere and you take in a greater variety of parties and interests. You make it less probable that a majority of the whole will have a common motive to invade the rights of other citizens. Or if such a common motive exists, it will be more difficult for all who feel it to discover their own strength and to act in unison with each other. Besides other impediments, it may be remarked that where there is a consciousness of unjust or dishonorable purposes, communication is always checked by distrust in the proportion to the number whose concurrence is necessary. Do we see this? Do you understand why the Electoral College is so important now? Because without the Electoral College, very small areas like Houston and San Diego and Los Angeles and Detroit and New York will always pick your representatives, because that's democracy. And democracies have always been incompatible with liberty. Isn't that what he said? And what does it do? You have these big major city centers that if we did it by a 51% over the entire nation, then what would happen is these violent factions would oppress the individual rights of everyone else. So the Electoral College does a couple different things. It keeps us from being a direct democracy, because he goes on further to say that we have to pick these different positions from the same pool of authority, which is the people, but by different modes, so that we don't have a direct democracy. Because a direct democracy breeds faction, and that's the death of popular government. Does that make sense? And he's very clear about that in Federalist 10. So that's why it really alarms me when my Senator, Mike Shirkey, the top Republican in Michigan, co-sponsored a national popular vote interstate compact bill. Obviously, the man's never read Federalist 10. But he was elected for how many terms? Don't we think that this should be required reading for the people that we vote for? Don't you think that they should have to take a test on that? I do. Because all the ones I ask questions of show me just how ignorant they are of the founding and our founding principles and our Constitution and the Federalist Papers, which tell us the why behind the what. Hence, it clearly appears that the same advantage which a republic has over democracy in controlling the effects of faction, not the causes, but the effects of faction, is enjoyed by a large over a small republic, is enjoyed by the union over the states composing it. Does the advantage consist in the substitution of representatives who enlightened views and virtuous sentiments render them superior to local prejudices and schemes of injustice? It will not be denied that the representation of the Union will be most likely to possess these requisite endowments. Does it consist in the greater security afforded by a greater variety of parties against the event of any one party being able to outnumber and oppress the rest? In an equal degree, does the increased variety of parties comprised within the Union increase this security? Does it, in fine, consist in the greater obstacles opposed to the concert and accomplishment of the secret wishes of an unjust and interested majority? Here again, the extent of the Union gives it the most palpable advantage. The influence of the factious leaders may kindle a flame within their particular states, but will be unable to spread a general conflagration through the other states. A religious sect may degenerate into a political faction in a part of the Confederacy, but the variety of sects dispersed over the entire face of it must secure the national councils against any danger from that source. A rage of paper money for an abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked project will be less apt to pervade the whole body of the Union than a particular member of it. In the same portion as such a malady is more likely to taint a particular county or district than an entire state. Do we see this happening now? Yeah, we sure do. This is why lobbyists were formed, right? So that that factious group, small group, can push things. Now, of course, I'm going to get bashed on this, but, yeah, money, the love of money, the root of all evil. I'm going to get bashed on this, but how many people in the United States do you believe are overtly homosexual or support overt homosexuality?
How many?
You would think it was a huge majority, wouldn't you? But it's not. It's a minority. But what does that minority have control of?
Media.
The federal government.
The media, federal government. So they're factious, they're small factious group because we've pushed ourselves more into democracy and out of a republic, have this control, right? No different than Warren Buffett, who has convinced everybody, a small minority that has a big voice, that pipelines cause environmental damage, when there's only been 3 to 5 pipeline problems. But yet, we have 1,000 derailments a year, and how are we shipping our oil? By rail. Why is that? Because Warren Buffett owns the rails. So would it be in his factious intent then to create this illusion that there's a problem with the environment in pipelines and having people protest them so that we can start shipping things by rail that are actually more dangerous and more injurious to our natural resources? But why is it that people fall for that? Because we've lost critical thought. Because we've lost people who actually study history and look at things with a critical mind. We've become sheep. We want to go somewhere on Sunday for somebody to tell us what to believe. We watch the news to have somebody tell us what to feel. And we go to universities to have somebody tell us what to think. It's a problem. That'll probably get us banned from YouTube too, by the way. In the extent and proper structure of the Union, therefore, we behold a Republican remedy for the diseases most incident to Republican government. And according to the degree of pleasure and pride we feel in being Republicans, ought to be our zeal in cherishing the spirit and supporting the character of federalism. There is one slide that I missed that I want to go back to because it's a very important slide.
I think it was about number 5 or so. I don't know.
I think it's this one right here.
That's what I'm thinking.
There are again 2 methods of removing the causes of faction. The one by destroying liberty, which is essential to its existence. The other by giving to every citizen the same opinions and same passions and the same interests. It could never be more truly said than the first remedy that it was worse than the disease. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an alignment without which it instantly expires. But it could not be less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish the annihilation of air, which is essential to animal life because it imparts to fire its destructive agency. So that's one of the key principles in Federalists tend to take away. There's 2. First off, faction is the demise of all popular government. There's 2 things that cause faction: liberty and the unequal distribution of property. And there's 2 ways to deal with faction: either eliminate its causes or eliminate its effects. By eliminating its effects, the Republican model, through representation, has the best method of dealing with the effects, such as the Electoral College, such as prior to the 17th Amendment, that the senators were picked by the legislature of each state, not by a popular vote. Because if we had a popular vote for president and a popular vote for legislatures, for your representative, and a popular vote for your senators, then have we not created a democracy?
Yes.
So, and what do we know about democracies? There's tumultuous in their life as they are violent in their deaths. They are transitional governments that take us from liberty to a revolution, a socialist revolution. And that socialist revolution always ends with an oligarchy. We're very close. I'm here to tell you, we have devolved very far and we are very close, if not there already. Now, I listened to a speech by George Bush in which he talked about the great democracy America. I looked at my wife and I said, he is either very ignorant or he knows something we don't know. I would hope that he was ignorant and not knowing that we're a republic and thought that we were a democracy. Because the fact of the matter is, if we have devolved into democracy, democracies are short-lived. They're as violent in their deaths as they are tumultuous in their lives. Are things a little tumultuous right now? I would say.
Ask Atlanta.
Yeah. So if things are tumultuous, maybe he knew something I didn't know. Maybe this New World Order, maybe this Build Back Better, maybe this big reset was part of that tumultuousness that takes us to the violent death that is a socialist revolution that will set up an oligarchy of communism in an entire New World Order. Think about it. Not hard to imagine, is it? Once you start understanding what the Republican method is. Everybody remembers the 2020 election, in which one side says, well, it's the most secure election in history. Can you tell me that you can watch our president speak and believe that he got 81 million votes? If you can, I've got some oceanfront property in Arizona. Go and cheat. So I'm not going to say that the election was stolen. I'm not going to say that there was cheating in the election. But I come from a law enforcement side. When something doesn't pass the smell test, you don't automatically call it something. You investigate it to find out what it is. And depending on where the investigation leads you, then you can name it, correct? I can't call it crime. I can be suspicious. And that suspiciousness should take me to a point of investigation. So my question is, why was it that no one within our government wanted to investigate it? They were so convinced without investigating that everything was fine. Even though a lot of us, it didn't pass the smell test, right? I'm not going to say it was fraud, but there was just a gentleman in Arizona that was found with 42 ballots in his house, and he happens to be an elected official. See, little things like that. Now people go, well, that's not enough to overturn an election. No, but when we're doing it by democratic means rather than a republic, it certainly is, isn't it? See, in Michigan, we have 83 small republics. And those 83 small republics are broken up in such a way that in the 2020 election, we had 14 congressional districts, which means we had 14 electoral college votes. And then each senator got one, so that's 16. But instead, what we did was 40 years ago, a legislative body decided that whoever gets the 51% of all the people in the state, that we give all the electoral college votes to. Does that sound like a democracy or a representative republic?
Democracy.
See, a Republican form of government requires representation. In fact, in Article 4, it guarantees every citizen in the United States a Republican form of government. If they guarantee you a Republican form of government, that means that you must be represented. So let's say everybody in my congressional district voted for A. And I was the only congressional district that had 100% for candidate A. But everybody else in the state voted for candidate B. Should my electoral college vote go to candidate B? No, because then I'm not represented, am I? That's not representative government. That's democracy. And democracies breed faction.